Greetings and welcome to Grateful Dead Book Reviews. I am Stuart Ake, very excited to be with Mark Rodriguez. Mark is a conceptual artist, Deadhead, and the brains and brawn behind After All Is Said and Done, a handsome tome here, which spotlights Mark's Sisyphean task, his Gens project, which is it's an exploration of sound, vision, space and time. It's part lifestyle, kind of a part spiritual meditation, if you will, and an exploration and commentary on ephemera. So to provide some context for After All Is Said and Done, Mark, welcome.
Thank
And
you.
can you talk to us about Gens, how this came about, or what is first gen or the first iteration of the project? And we'll provide some context.
Sure. So that project kind of came about as a part of a conversation with a friend of mine, Matt Siegel, fellow artist. And we were talking about so a little bit of background. Both of us actually we were talking about fish and like following fish in our teenage years. And at the time in the art world, I think or well, at least in like the Los Angeles art world that we belonged to at the time, that it was kind of like this like closeted affinity for this, this type of music, and this kind of scene. So we both had discovered that we both had like this similar interest, and we were talking about the Grateful Dead and jam bands and all this stuff. Because it kind of, like basically like you didn't want to tell anyone that you were into this in the art world because they would literally like
Loss
laugh
of
at you.
credibility kind of thing.
No, I just think it was kind of like they didn't understand it, so they
Okay.
kind of almost laughed it off as like the kind of uh characterization you might get from like broader culture at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
So we kept talking and I was like, oh, I wonder if you could ever like integrate tapes and like tape trading as like a material in some kind of like art piece. And we kind of like babbled on. And then later on in the day, and I think I just started thinking about it and I was like, oh, I think I can actually like try and work with tapes and like bootleg tapes of Grateful Dead shows as a medium. So as a curiosity, I reached out on Craigslist, I think at the time, and I asked if anyone had Grateful Dead tapes that they were willing to part with. And that kind of started me out. Someone in West Hollywood was generous enough to give me their, I think, 100 tape collection. And there's something about that exchange that was kind of interesting, I think, at the time because it was 2000 and I think it was 2010 about. Um, I think at the time it was at this point in the Grateful Dead's cultural impact, I guess, where they were kind of like asleep,
Yeah.
which is a little bit hard to understand now in this like heightened like fever dream of like
Civic
consumerism and the Grateful
anniversaries
Dead.
here. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And I think it was kind of just like people didn't really know what to do with the tapes. There was nothing really going on in Dead World at the time necessarily. I mean, I think Bob Weir was touring with like Rat Dog and Phil Lesh might appear with some friends. Um, and uh, it was just like I don't know what to do with these, but I don't want to throw them out. And like part of that collection had this person's like first show, and it was like written on the spine of the J card, and they pointed out to they're like, "This is my first show," and there was something kind of like I don't know, kind of like spiritual or kind of charged about that particular tape, and then this collection, and that kind of started me thinking about. Um, kind of just like how charged they are as just kind of these objects of information and uh it's been touched by a person that's like been really uh kind of my words aren't working very well today for my brain, but
Well, I think you
it's a, someone.
charged with a sense of power because these tapes were, even though they are physical objects, um, they recorded a time and place, and that meant stuff to people. Hence,
Yeah.
the recording of the tapes themselves.
So, I mean, yeah, there's like a whole host of like reference points just coming out of like one tape. And I knew that, it's like the Grateful Dead as a like an ensemble cast of musicians, basically, or a musical ensemble. Um, the career of the Grateful Dead, with that copyrighted name is like finite. It ends at 1995. So like I, was like, oh, maybe I can try and just collect all the shows on tape. Like I don't know of anyone that's like attempted this. Like I'll give it a shot. Like it seems like easy to go across Craigslist from like every state in America and like see what's out there. So that started me like kind of like finding tapes from like, I don't know, New Hampshire and having them shipped out and would lead to like driving to Arizona and picking up like 1,200 tapes from someone's deceased brother. And like there's a lot of times where it was like felt kind of heavy because I was like taking on these tapes from deceased relatives, and the relative or sibling or whatever it was, like just wanted to honor this individual by like giving a good home to these tapes.
Very thoughtful.
Um, so like, I kind of dwelled in that area for like 5 years while I was trying to figure out what to do with the tapes, in terms of like art making. And uh I eventually realized like I wouldn't really be able to like collect them all. And my practice involves kind of just like making systems of production where like the production kind of takes control over making decisions. So like I don't have to make decisions after a certain point, like the piece of art is making the decisions for me. So I think like in a way, the Gen kind of serial work kind of helped me crystallize a lot of those ideas and like helped me kind of work through to like kind of polish it a little bit. Whereas like now I'm collecting postage stamps and making paintings with postage stamps. So like it's a little, it's like almost like like the Gen is like the junior to like now the postage stamp senior work. And
But
like
what is the Gen?
so the Gen series, at its basic component is like 2009, or the first one is 2,976 bootleg Grateful Dead tapes that are marked 1965 to 1995. That is not the complete collection of uh, Grateful Dead shows on audio cassette. It's probably like three quarters or so. I thought at the time that it was like more interesting to just start this project and present an incomplete history, which kind of led to a little bit more finesse in terms of like successive versions of this sculpture. So what happens so the first gen is like all what I would consider like original in terms of them being like, in art speak, it would be like a found object. So they're all taken from, different collections from different people, not having anything to do with my hand whatsoever, other than putting them in chronological order. and making a huge mahogany cabinet for them. Um, and then in order to present first gen, I had to dub 1,700 tapes, I think, something around 1,700 tapes to second gen, which second gen was made up of some original tapes and defining that as like tapes I have not dubbed, tapes that I have gotten from other people and have no hand in.
Yep.
And then there were 1,700 dubbed cassette tapes with my handwriting on the, another handmade J card that I produced. And then that makes up, how many? Maybe like 3,000 tapes or 2,998, something like that. I had to come up with like this whole mathematical algorithm
Wow.
to plan out successive versions of the Gen sculptures and to know how many tapes would be in each cabinet so that I could then design the
Construct the
cabinet.
cabinet.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that we went, or well, I went through uh nine, so I'm at ninth gen currently, and kind of like at a stalling out because it kind of became like this very it became very expensive and it became very hard to like keep going without getting collateral uh investment in so that I could like kind of keep producing it. So
Is it,
it's
I mean, and are they private collectors that are taking these on? Are they installations in a gallery or museum setting, or is it just the task of, or was it, now that you're working on the stamp project, or was it the process itself? And so presentation or audience had less of a role.
it was presented to the public through an art gallery. It was collected by a private individual, or well, it has been 8 times, 8 individuals have collected the individual Gen works. I would love for it to be, uh, you know, purchased by an institution. That would be great. My thought with just the whole project too is like going back to kind of like beginning the project, it was like it felt like at that time, at least in 2010, like no one knew what to do with the tapes. People were throwing out tapes. Uh, in a way, making it art was a form of preservation
Wow.
of these things. These objects that do have audio connected to them, but maybe like the audio could be pure horseshit or sound like pure horseshit, and like just it doesn't matter because there's just this object that has kind of this more, it just has this different value. It has cultural value, it has spiritual value, it has personal autobiographical value. I could keep going on and on about that, but the fact that individual collectors, collected 8 of those means to me that there's, uh, all these artifacts are preserved in some way, and could eventually one day make it into a museum to be further kind of preserved. But, um, I kind of see it as like, I mean, this kind of goes towards the book as like the book in a way is a uh, opportunity to showcase like what people won't see, which is like all these tape covers, the amount of work put into that might never see the light of day, might be in someone's like audio collection to listen to, but they might not be able to share any of the artwork with anyone else, or might not know how to do that, might not have any interest in doing that. um so like, in essence, the book is like this opportunity to kind of be like, this is kind of what this looks like. And um, you know, that's just one facet of it. Obviously, you could be listening to the tapes, but uh, I think there's a lot of value just in terms of like going back to this person's like J card that says it's their first show. It's like a diary entry. Um, that for like all these multiple individuals. There was like a tape collection I got, I think from Florida, and it just occasionally had this person's scrawl on the back of the J card. And it was like these mini diary entries, even though this person seemed like a complete fuck up and like acid casualty, but like a lot of their notes are just like, oh, I took bong rips during Dark Star. So like they were at the show and like obviously felt like really proud of taking some bong rips during Dark Star, which is kind of funny. But to them, it was like probably a very acute um, experience, and like it's
And they
notated.
and they found they had the need and found the time to preserve that. And they were probably not thinking of audience, like you were saying, almost like a journal entry, to capture time and place. So what why a book? Because it seems like the expression would be so conducive to film or a multimedia thing of the process of building the like I think we used to call them like Napa Valley. That was like the
Huh?
company that did Napa Valley
Yep.
Wood Company or whatever. And they're still around, actually, still up
Really?
Valley. Yep. I pass them on the
Making
way to work. Uh,
making tape crates?
I don't think they're making. I think it's more for wooden boxes for
Oh,
shipping
interesting.
offline. Yeah. But
Cool.
I will go in because people have asked me about that and say, "Hey, do you
Hey,
guys have
you should.
it's still around?" Um, so,
That's amazing.
but the genesis of the book, you're like, "Hey, I'm going to capture this," or how did that come about?
Well, I think it was kind of I kind of touched upon this uh just now, but like the fact that I was like kind of the custodian for these or becoming the custodian for like huge amounts of tapes. I mean, some people might, give me flack for like not sharing or not, distributing, like all these different kind of things occur as like I become more public with the project. And like for me in the beginning, like, with that person's tape collection from West Hollywood, or no, I guess it was Santa Monica. Sorry, misrepresenting this individual. Like in the beginning, I started scanning all these J cards and like I started putting them on Tumblr and posting the tape covers on the day that the concert was.
Okay.
So like I think for like a whole year, I was like taking in tapes, scanning all the J cards, chronologically ordering everything, and then I would post all of the J cards I had for a certain day on that day. Like you can still look at there's an archive for the Tumblr. Uh, if anyone's interested, which has probably a few more tape examples than the book does, but um, through that process, I was like always it would be great. My thought was like it'd be great to be able to figure out a way to share this in a more of a physical way. And um I think after that year, I just was like, oh, I could make, like I could very well pitch this as a book, and I think I could find a publisher that would be interested in that. And at the same time, me being who I am, like I was like, oh, and this is a great way to like have an excuse to try and knock on, someone like Dennis McNally's door and like talk to them. Like I love to I love to like investigate different histories. Like I think partly that's like the collector in me, not the artist. And I love kind of like asking questions that, like we were discussing before with Brian Anderson's book, it's like trying to take another route, like take a different historical stance or providing a different history than has already been like relayed over and over again. And in the Grateful Dead world, we all know like there are multiple accounts of like the same kind of blurbs and same histories and all that stuff, same legacies. So when I started pitching the book, my idea was like, well, I can definitely pitch it as like a coffee table book with, that's art. It's the J cards. That's like fascinating enough. And I can eventually if I can get my foot in the door there, I can like then provide this other thing and like, you know, make it a little bit more robust in terms of something that I would like to see. So that's kind of how that came about. And luckily, anthology editions, which I think is kind of no longer really active, um, was just starting out. So that was like 2016, uh, which would be like a year after I finished first gen, meaning that I have completed second gen and had shown first gen. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that then luckily they were up for it and they were very supportive. And then became the issue of like figuring out licensing for the book, which took, I guess, another 3 years to
Wow.
kind of navigate the music worlds and like find who I knew who knew X, Y, and Z so I could get, my idea to Mark Pincus's door. And I also had to get my idea to Bernie Cahill's door or Cahill. Um, so it took a long time to like make all those connections to be able to get those kind of meetings, which
Wow.
was another, for me, it was interesting. And by the end of it, it was like, hey, if we can't do this by like next week, like I don't think we can do this book, kind of kind of thing. So it was like always kind of riding this line, trying to convince Anthology to give me a little bit more time to like, you know, find whoever I needed to find to talk to whoever to get an
And
okay.
so what because you were not you it was because of the iconography that was even though it was done by people or the having the song titles in terms of licensing, or is it that these pieces, these Jace cards are considered pieces of art unto themselves, and so there were worries of licensing there? Can you?
I I think first and foremost, Anthology wanted to be above board, so they never wanted to use anything Grateful Dead related uh without like having permission.
Hey, so Mark, when I first saw the book at a bookstore in Berkeley, and I flipped through it, I was always like, "Hey, new Grateful Dead book," and I thought it was you know, on first glance when you open it up, there's 100 and X pages devoted to capturing the J cards. So I thought, wow, what a cool idea! But then I didn't even realize that it was a part of the Gen project, like a manifestation of you capturing time and place and presenting it. So then I got even more excited because I was like, wow, this is not just preserving J card culture, if you will. He's doing something with it. So it that's when I got really giddy about, especially giddy about the project.
Well, I'm surprised when you say something like that because generally like like I spoke about like switching gears into postage stamps and like going down that route. It's like kind of almost a result of like kind of publishing that book, kind of like ending like a big chapter of the, overall Dead Tape Collector project. But it also was kind of like this frustration artistically with like um, the effect of working with a huge cultural entity like the Grateful Dead and integrating that into an individual like small peon art practice such
Huh.
as my own. And what I started to notice a lot was like I became sort of like this anonymous person. Like I didn't exist. Like this project almost like existed on its own,
Wow.
levied by like the Grateful Dead, but like you know, no credit to my name, like nothing like that. And I think almost like in some ways, working conceptually and even sculpturally in a contemporary artistic sense, it's like a lot of people, like a lot of Americans don't really understand contemporary art. So in a weird way, it would be like, you know, uh, I guess like I just became like, oh, the artist that's working with like tapes. And like there's no that's not nuanced at all. And there's no like no reference to like other forms of artistic making or like maybe the purpose of that. It's more just like, oh, it's another Grateful Dead thing. It's like a Grateful Dead product. Like
Well,
that's
it's easy to put a box around it, and classify it, and put you on a shelf, I guess.
sure.
So, yeah.
So I mean when you're like, oh, I realize this is part of like an art project, like that makes me feel good because that gets conveyed through the book, or at least it's like present as like the first part of the book. Um, and like, I mean, a funny story is I was at a Dead and Co show, it probably was like 2019, I guess. I think so. Um, and I had gotten seats from Bernie Cahill after a meeting with him to get like the book going. And I brought my friend Elizabeth with me, who had worked on another like self-published Dead project with me, and who's also like an artist in her own right. Um, and we're sitting there in these like nice box seats at the sorry, at the bowl. What is it? What's the name of
Hollywood
it?
Bowl,
Yeah,
or
the Hollywood Bowl.
yeah.
And then like right next to us, these people, this one guy is like, "Hey, have you heard of this guy who's like collecting all of these tapes? He's an artist." And I just thought, it's like that's like basically what I'm talking about is like I'm this anonymous person that has no history and I'm doing this thing and I'm of service to this like bigger cultural thing. And like I didn't, I'm not gonna like reach over and be like, that's me. I just was like really funny to hear someone like talk about that at like a Dead and Co show.
Right, but it was resonating though. I mean, that there's got to be some pride involved in that. Like somebody heard and it resonated, right? So that's
Yeah, and it's also it's funny because the other two friends were like, "Oh, cool, yeah, whatever." So like it's kind of like humbling also because I think as an artist, like l- would like to think that I try to practice, uh, you know, the perception that I'm making something, and yes, it can be for other people, but primarily I'm making it for myself. And if one person gets it, that's great, but like not everyone needs to like know about it. Not everyone needs to celebrate it. Not everyone needs to understand it. Like, if it hits one person, like great, that's amazing. So it's like those types of experiences. It's like when you have an art show and you get to see people like look at your art, but you don't necessarily have to like be right next to them being like, what do you think? What do you think? It's just like kind of cool to observe how a person like interacts with it, which
well.
is it's really rare to be able to have that opportunity, I think, without exposing your anonymity in some respect. But also going back to an anonymity, it's annoying when like that happens over and over again that people don't realize or don't really understand the art part of the project. So, thank you for that. Uh, and yeah, I mean that was kind of like, another aspect of the book that like, or maybe that an opportunity that the book provided that I saw I could potentially like make real, but like the beginning of it was like, tape covers are going to be like kind of the easiest thing to offer up to a reader or a potential audience as something that's palatable, understandable, and attractive. And then that's like the key to opening up the door to like providing other forms of information with like a subject matter that I find completely fascinating.
So there's another part of the book where in the this second third of the book is a lot of interviews with players within the Grateful Dead sphere's audio and taping realm. So people who were part of this preservation culture, if you will. So was that part of your research for the art project? Was that separate but equal? Or was it just your own curiosity and you wanted to preserve them in book form? Because I mean, at the installations, is there an audio component of sound and vision, if you will, not to pull, borrow too heavily from Bowie there, um, but is it where did the interviews come about? Because they're all
So the
amazing. Yeah.
like I had talked about before, like there's this process of actually getting the book, getting a yes from,
Hours.
Grateful Dead Productions and Rhino, um, and I mean basically Warner Brothers to be able to do this book. And like I had no idea what I was gonna do once if I could get the book okayed. But I knew I wanted, in the way that I had been researching the Grateful Dead since I was like 15 or something, like in a Evanston library, you know, Dennis McNally to me was like this really interesting person that I would love to talk to. So like as an artist, I mean, and kind of a researcher and collector, to me, I was like, oh, it'd be amazing if I could get an okay on this book, because then I can have an excuse to then knock on someone's door and be like, hey, I have this book. Would you like to be a part of it? Whereas if I was just like, I'm an artist and like I'm interested in this, would you be interested in talking to me? I might not have as much leverage in the situation as I would if I had more to offer, I guess.
Understood.
Um, so I didn't really know what I was doing. And then the weird hiccup that happened was the pandemic started, right? Like maybe a month after I got um the okay. Like, and we signed, I was signing a contract with Anthology to like, really seal the book deal. Um, and, you know, when I finally got off to the races, it was like, all right, like, what do I want to do? And I often I forget about this, but also like kind of remember like I was like, oh, it would be great to have like Guido Sarducci uh introduce the book. And like that was kind of like one of the first things I did was call I can't forget I can't remember his real name. But I somehow got the number of like Guido Sarducci and I
Father
called.
Guido Sarducci.
Yeah, and I call him and I'm like, hey, like I'm doing this book on the Grateful Dead. I thought it would be interesting if you like introduced it as Guido Sarducci. And he was just like, what? Like, I mean, I was friends with Jerry. He's a great man, like an amazing musician, da 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 da. But like, I don't want to like I there's nothing I have to say. Like he didn't understand that. Like even though he's a comedian, like I felt like it was kind of like an obvious kind of joke to like extend his character's relationship with the Grateful Dead in terms of a book. But anyway, that didn't work out. But like, there were certain things that kind of like myths, I guess, about making a book that kind of I had to find out for myself were not like, my fantasies were not reality. Like I was like, oh, I have this book publisher. I can now gain access to like anyone I want. And like, I would have loved to interview the band members and like that sort of thing, but I guess what ended up happening was I kind of navigated this other kind of part of the Grateful Dead organization world, which is like these people that have worked for the band that were instrumental in like doing certain things for them. You know, the band members are just playing the music, but there's this whole company that also, has been, I guess, historicized in some sense. And there is historical proof that like they exist, that they are interviewed for certain things and like relics or
Mhm.
the Golden Road and all that sort of thing. But I kind of wanted to like, I think it kind of revealed to me slowly. I was like, oh, I'm kind of like being of service to like the surrounding personnel to the band. And like, I think there's something interesting about that, as well as then giving voice to the people that kind of like helped historicize or like publish the band through like fandom,
Hmm.
like like Blair Jackson. Or in terms of the book, it's like these people gave so much of their time. I mean, I've had so much generosity bestowed upon me in terms of like collecting tapes, and like I kind of feel like in aspects where like someone's asking me for an interview, it's like I would love to give my, I would like to pass that forward in terms of like not just being like, I have like only 15 minutes, which isn't going to really give you a lot of time or like really a lot of information in terms of like the breadth of this whole project. It's like we were touching upon, um, all the obstacles I had to deal with just in terms of like making the art piece. And what I was going to say is like, in the middle of like producing, up to fourth or fifth gen, like I would always like if I sold a gen, I would then put a lot of that money into like blank audio cassette tapes, into the wood, manufacture of the cabinet, and then into potentially buying more collections so like I could mitigate like not having to dub so many tapes and all that. And like at some point I was like, okay, I'm gonna call up the guy that I call in Pasadena every time and buy like 1,000 or 2,000 like blank tapes. And I called him and he's like, oh yeah, like the one, I think it was like the one Korean manufacturer of magnetic tape has halted. So there is no magnetic tape left in like being produced in the world, period. And
Wow.
so like at that point it like became this funny thing where it's like, oh, now I gotta like hoard blank magnetic tape. Like I had to buy magnetic tape from like Canada, from tape dubbers who are willing to like send me, you know, basically dead stock blank audio tape. And then it just became this really weird thing. Like I was National Audio in Ohio, I think, was like kind of they had like stock still, so I was kind of like buying that up in the way that I could at the time. And then by the time I got done with the next gen, like I couldn't get any more tape. So like there'd be like issues like that, and then like the market for Grateful Dead tapes changed as I was going along with the project as well. So like by 2020, it was like, people were like, yeah, I'm collecting tapes too. Like, but then it had created this other market. Um, so, there's all like, point being, like, I could talk for hours on just that alone, or I could talk about the book, or, I could talk about myself and my personal history, et cetera, et cetera. But like, the point being, it's the book for me symbolizes like all of this. And it's like, it was my way of trying to condense and consolidate that all into like something that would be readable and helpful for and interesting for other people. Um, so like the interviews in that sense, like even though I didn't know what I was doing, like after probably like a few months of like talking to uh kind of a varying cast of characters, it kind of became more about like, okay, like how can I be of service to these people's voices in relation to the Grateful Dead and in relation to like the subject matter, which is, basically bootleg Grateful Dead tapes. How do they come to be? But like part of the subtle like history that I was trying to uncover was like how involved were the members of the band actually in like providing this kind of like myth of
Hmm.
like, this is what we do is we tape people tape us and distribute this. And so part of me was kind of like curious if it like had anything to do with them intentionally, or it was really just like a clusterfuck of like, different things going on.
And it turned out
It
that
was a
it was a
clusterfuck of
clusterfuck. It was like,
things going
no,
on.
no, no. Okay. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Right. Because
I mean, it just seemed, I wasn't able to really prove that. Like, the only person that really spoke to it, I think, by the time I had like kind of crystallized that thought in a way that I could ask it as a question was Dennis. And, he was like, I don't know, they just didn't want to be cops. So, like, and it's like, yeah, that's like an ongoing kind of legacy of the band, I guess, or like a historical kind of picture of like the spirit of things. But I'd also like to think like there's these different like this is almost like the conspiratorial aspect of my research. But like it's interesting that there's like date wise, if you look at like the beginning of Relics magazine and like there's letters in the archive from Les Capel to the band that are like I had the like this is part of like the joy I had of making the book was it's like, oh, I can put these documents in here and like I can do it. Like it's okay to do this. Like I'm not gonna get reprimanded for it and I can kind of expose in a positive light like these documents that exist in the archive and one of them was like this like kind of like 50-page parts of this 50-page document that Les Capel published and sent to the band that's like, I want to make a connoisseurs club for tapes, which is basically Dick's picks or Dave's picks or like the way the organization has survived in a way realized that like the fans could publicize for them. And then that's why there's this great allowance for it because it's basically free advertising. Like the Golden Road and Relics at a point are really just doing the service of like hiring PR for the band. And in a way, I was like, oh, this is kind of genius. Like this, like tapes, all this stuff. Like I don't know about the tapes per se being like um, a conscious maneuver to like market oneself as in 2025, we have like all these books from people that are like, this was like the most amazing marketing scheme ever, and they knew it. And it's like, I don't know if they knew that, but I think they did know that like fanzines could serve as like marketing and they didn't have to do anything. Like they just phenomenologically, like this existed for them as an opportunity.
I think, yeah,
But
I think it was a common, it was time and place, maybe some laissez-faire practices of like, well, it's not hurting us. And then it is the, I think it is the kind of a Jungian archetype of grassroots marketing, right?
yeah,
The people rising up and kind of doing it on their own to help spread that mythology. And Dennis, I think, does a great job or did a great job of kind of cultivating that through the media during their biggest and yet most culturally fraught years in the 80s 90s there.
well, and I also think there's a lot of unsaid credit to Eileen Law. That was kind of like the third act of the book is kind of like where like the real joy was for me working on it for 2 years after, getting the contract signed and like, before deadline basically. And I think we ended up, I think I had like 1,800 pages of interviews or something by the end and like had to edit it down to 183 or something like that.
Wow.
So like, there was a lot of like conversation going on in terms of like me and like the subjects that I was talking with. But like it also came to a point where it was like, all right, Mark, you gotta like we got to put this into the book now. Like, and then it became like, well, how do we, you know, it was like, how do we present the tapes? And for me, it was like in chronological order, duh. Like you have set lists, like why don't we create like some form of like a chronological historical narrative through tapes? Like that's a no-brainer. And then with the interviews, it was like, oh, I don't like, well, actually chronologically, because it like kind of was like one person led me to another, and then I researched and then, like, sometimes I don't pick up on the design intent of X, Y, and Z. So like, there's so much information packed into the book, and there's so much I wanted to put in the book that I couldn't put in. So it's like, it really is like this exercise in like compromise and readability, legibility, and like what you really want to express to an audience or reader. And like, that was the end result. And like, I think I would hope I did a pretty good job of like editing as much as I had to, but like condensing it into like a kind of clear sort of story and like making relationships between all of these historical narrators to like kind of make sense of like, my bizarre, conspiracy theory history of like, taping and what that like meant to me while I was just doing this project and doing this research.
Wow. Hey, Mark, thank you so much for shedding light on the artistic process, and also best of luck with the new postage or the stamp project. But thank you for carving out time and chatting about after all is said and done. Greatly appreciated.
Stu, it was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on.